that this Apple group will notice. These folks will take notice, and that'll give me a really good chance of success. Mm-hmm. And it worked. We took the case to the Macworld show in San Francisco the first year, and it just blew up. It was great. It was a huge, huge response to the product.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. So with the different aspects of your career, how have you thought about the idea of fear and uncertainty? And did that ever creep up when you were moving from one project to another or from one industry to another? And if that's the case, how did you push past it and still continue to deliver high quality work?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I think that there's two parts, I think, to the answer. One is that a lot of people are so afraid of changing the status quo that they never take a chance at all, right? So that's the first thing that you have to be aware of is, am I afraid of this? And the fear is a good thing. Like, we're human beings are sort of trained to be fearful of situations that could cause us harm, right? That's how we've existed for 200,000 years. That's why we've survived. But at the same time, if your present situation is worse, if your fear of change is, if your fear of your current situation is more fearful, if that induces more fear than any fear of the unknown, then you've gotten to the point where it's time to change. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So what I did was, I think I really leaned on going back to my experience as a painter. When you're staring at a blank canvas, and I'm sure this is true for writers and other people who do creative work, you've got to overcome that initial jumping off the cliff phase, right? So I just started another painting now. I just got asked to be part of a new gallery here in San Diego that's opening in 2 weeks, and I'm working on a new piece. And the owner said, I need that piece done in 2 weeks for the opening for this new gallery. And I turned and I looked at the painting and I said, there's no way I'm going to finish this in 2 weeks. But there's that feel like, okay, now I've got to jump off the cliff. I've got to get this done. So I think that the thing that gets you through is, or the thing that got me through, is that sense of, I'm used to this. Being an artist means you're constantly putting yourself in situations where you don't have the answers. And if you do have the answers, you're not growing, you're not pushing yourself, you're not getting any better. I mean, like I said earlier, I could have stayed a painter in New York and just kind of painted the same pictures for the people who wanted them. It wasn't that interesting to me. So I have this need for change. I think a lot of people are fearful of change. To me, that's exciting. To me, that it's part of what makes life interesting. That's what I love about running MacCase, is no 2 days are really the same. That's what I love about, I just, this time last year, I was working on a race car for Audi, and I got to do deliveries for these race cars, and I hadn't done deliveries in a really long time. And the challenge was pretty steep. That the challenge given to me by the client, it's one thing when a client says, we want you to do this, X, Y, Z, now just, that's what we want. It's another thing when he says, do whatever you want. Oh, okay, that's much more of a scary proposition to do whatever you want, because now I got to do something great, right? I mean, I could do something great anyway, but it becomes a lot harder when you have that kind of freedom. So I think ultimately you have to embrace the change. You have to embrace the fear. It's part of the process. Anytime you get too comfortable, you stop growing. And I think that if you really, the experience of being alive, the excitement of being alive, is when you're at the edge of that cliff, and whatever the project is that you're starting for the first time or starting for the 100th time, but you're going to do it in a new way, because that's going to be scary because you don't have the answer. I think that if you start the project and you don't know how it's going to end up, then you're onto something good. If you're very confident in knowing that you're going to be able to do it and it's not going to be a problem, maybe you should be doing something else. Because that excitement, that sense of the unknown, that's what creativity is all about. That's where we live. Like, that's why we do what we do, because the rest of the world doesn't want to do that. They want that safe little box that they can hide in.
Right.
And for me, it's always been the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And like I said earlier, when I left Chrysler, my father thought I was crazy because he comes from a world where he wanted that security. But I think I had that confidence in myself to know that, excuse me, whatever I was going to do, I was just going to, do it the best that I could, and it would be okay.
Yeah. What does your process look like in the beginning when you first are coming up with a concept, whether it's for a car or for, what you did at MacCase or any other product that you have? Is it similar depending, regardless, or is it dependent on each individual, item that you're designing?
Yeah, there's really two parts, right? I mean, as a designer, that's where design is different than, say, fine art, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I'm doing a painting, I'm just doing it for me. It's just, I have my own standard of what excellence is. I have my own standard of what a great piece is, of what a great painting is, and I'm trying to achieve that. And I don't care if anybody else likes it in the whole world. As long as I look at it and I smile and it brings me joy, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Design is kind of not that way. It can be that way. You can get the same joy out of it, but it has to work for other people. That's the difference. And so if I'm doing something for MacCase, then there's a customer base that's built in for that product. There is, I just redid, we have a product that we call a folio, that is a kind of like a book that the iPad lives in. And for many years, we made it where there was an integrated pencil pocket for the Apple Pencil. So when you got the Apple Pencil, you flipped this little tab up at the top of the case and it slid in, and the pencil was safe. The problem was not everybody used the pencil. The second problem was that when you went to fold it, it only allowed for two positions for the iPad to stand up like a stand or to type on it. And so it didn't allow a lot of flexibility because when you folded this thing up, the pencil case was kind of in the way. So when it came time to design the 2020 cases, I thought, okay, how can I improve this design?
Yeah.
And I came up with this magnetic accessory system, which no one had ever done before. Again, very innovative in this particular world. And it allows the attachment of 4 different accessories to the front of the case. And it allows the customer to customize the case. But not only that, it allows the user angle, the viewing angle, to be 70 degrees, from about 90 degrees to about 20 degrees. So we went from only having 2 viewing angles to now 70 degrees of viewing angle. So there was multiple improvements to the product because I had to empathize with the customer. What do they want? What are they looking for? So I think every project that you do that's not fine art has that empathy. People say, well, what makes a good designer? A good designer is empathetic because no matter who the user is, you have to empathize with their needs. What do they want? What do they need? Not only on a sort of functional way. It has to hold this. It has to protect this. It has to work in their life. But also, to me, in more of an emotional way and almost in a spiritual way. A lot of the products that I've done and that I do for MacCase, I try to imbue them with something greater than the sum of the parts. And we had one reviewer who was reviewing a product called the Flight Jacket, which is a vertical laptop case. And he said his wife walked in the room and she said, I want that. And he looked at her and he said, you don't even know what this is. She goes, I don't care. I want one. So, that kind of visceral emotional reaction. And that's the same emotional reaction that I had to those cars, back in high school, looking in the Ferrari dealership window and my nose pressed against the glass. I was like, I want one of those, that kind of thing. And so it's easy to do that in a car because of the scale and you've got a lot more to work with. But to do that with a laptop case, that's a little bit harder to do. So it's one of those things where you're onto something when you start to imbue what people perceive as these commodity items with this emotional resonance, with this sort of this ability to grab people and make them pay attention. And then you're onto something good.
Yeah. So I've also noticed that you have a class that you teach online, and you've also been, part of other student design reviews as well as taught at other universities and colleges. What made you want to create classes and start, working with students?
I think that like I said earlier, automotive design is one of the hardest things to do professionally and for a creative person,
Mm-hmm.
as far as, achieving that goal of becoming a professional. And I have a lot of knowledge. Right? You do something long enough, you get to know how things work. And I could see that there was a need for some clear and concise information about how to go about getting started with looking at this potentially being a career. There was a lot of online YouTube channels, and there's some online courses that people were doing, and I just thought, again, I could do this better. Like I've got a little bit more information. I could bring something fresh to it. I could bring a different approach. And, I thought I could combine my real world, teaching in real life, to a digital platform like Udemy, where I could say, okay, what do I remember my students liking when I was teaching? What kind of feedback do I remember getting that was positive, that, hey, you did a really good job with this, or you did a really good job with that? Or what was some of the stuff that I tried that didn't work,
Mm-hmm.
and let's not do that again. So I think I wanted to give back at the end of the day. I think that's really what it was about, because there are some fundamental things you have to know how to do when it comes to automotive design. There's a method of drawing where, we grow up writing with our wrist, right? When we learn to write our letters in grade school, we write with our hands. We write letters and numbers with our hands.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start drawing, we also draw with our hands. But to get the aesthetic of an automotive design drawing, you need to draw from your shoulder. So it's a completely different process. And I've had a lot of pushback from, aspiring car designers who telling me that I was crazy, or that they can't do it, or, and I'm like, yeah, because nothing worth doing is easy. Like, you've got to work at this stuff. And, that's the one thing I think that made a difference for me throughout my career, is the amount of grit that I seem to possess. And I don't know how you teach that, and I just watched the movie Whiplash, which was basically, the whole movie is about that idea of how much grit do you have. And there was, use of negative reinforcement to prove that concept. But, this is hard work. And you see these guys on YouTube, and they knock these sketches out, and they do it like in 10 times real time. They fast forward the video,
Mm-hmm.
and they look so easy. But if you don't know what they're doing to get that look, because they're not explaining anything, they're just showing you how good they are,
Mm-hmm.
you're never going to get better.
Hmm.
It's like someone, it's like Beethoven saying, "Oh, just play it like this." You're like, what?
Right.
You're freaking Beethoven. What are you talking about? It's like that kind of thing. You're never going to get it. So I think my goal was to bring a dose of reality to that world, and also to give back, and also to explain some of these concepts in a very simple way, so that if you were genuinely interested in pursuing this career, you had a good foundation to start with.
Wonderful. So with everything that you have done and experienced so far, what would you say has been the best advice that you ever received?
In my entrepreneurial life, the best piece of advice was, don't make any fatal mistakes. And the person said, you can make a lot of small mistakes. That's fine. That's part of the process. If you're not making mistakes, you're not growing, you're not putting yourself out there, you're not taking any chances. Mm-hmm. But if you make a fatal mistake, it's game over. Now, of course, you can maybe come back, and try something else. But that's tough. That's tough in a lot of ways. It's tough if you have a family. It's tough financially. It's tough, again, spiritually, emotionally. No one wants to, go through that turmoil. So having that idea in the back of my head of not making any fatal mistakes, or not making a fatal mistake, has really helped me to objectively look at a lot of the opportunities that have come across my desk over these last 22 years. I think that there's a time to take risks, there's a time to take chances, and then there's a time to say maybe that's not such a good idea. And again, you don't know.